Do we have the Robert Messick picture up?
Yes, he is here. Yep.
All right. Well, then, let me welcome everyone this evening. I am particularly pleased to see a couple of names I haven't seen before. So I want to welcome you folks to join us. If you'll supply your emails, then we'll make it so that you're added to Robert Cook's list to keep you abreast of who is coming next. And that way you also have access to the tape recordings of the past. This evening, it's my privilege to welcome Robert Messick as our speaker again. Let me get that on the slide share. He is the originator of the YouTube channel on the Book of Mormon editions, where he reviews various editions of the Book of Mormon. He began as a collector of various editions and has morphed into a love of all things Book of Mormon, especially researching the church history behind the Book of Mormon printing. His presentations on the timeline of the Book of Mormon editions and on Elvis Presley, the book, have been well received in our forum previously. And this evening, his effort to establish a comprehensive census of all things related to the book will be our focus. And so I thank you, Brother Messick, for volunteering to share with us on the forum. And I do want to invite you to join me in prayer. Originator of the idea of creation, master craftsman of formation, of earth, of life, the microcosmic, the macrocosmic, the source of all cognition. We bow in supplication as we focus our attention on your word, whispered to us in Scripture to enhance our expectation, to open our minds, our hearts, our ability to apprehend to greater understanding of what exists beyond our beginning and our end. For this evening, we would look between the lines, beyond the script, at the words scripturally provided, that we better apprehend the nuances in your word, that our lives be appropriately guided. Bless our presenter, Brother Messick, in his effort to communicate the dynamic potential of his census, and bless our participants to appreciate the depth, breadth, width, and other dimensions of the scriptures provided us. And as we look at our world with wars in Ukraine, Gaza, Sudan, and Myanmar, we perceive our need to learn the vocabulary of peace, to, like the wise men who followed the Christ illuminating star, bridge the cultures, bridge the time, bridge with gifts of gratitude to celebrate the Prince of Peace, the Lion and the Lamb with the child attitude. So thankfully, we approach your throne of grace in awe, yet aware, insignificant as we are, that you request our supplication. Yet all of our senses seek to be open to you in respectful adoration. We pray in the name of Jesus. Amen. All right, Brother Robert Messick, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay on this microphone?
I hear you well.
Yeah, good. So I'm going to screen share. I have a presentation that I'd like to share with you to go through kind of some details regarding this particular project and some stuff that we've done previously. So let me do this, see if I can do that. Okay, so I've got a full screen on this. Yay, so good. All right, well, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, some of you know my voice and some of you have seen my face, and many of you have seen my couple of presentations I've done for this Monday night presentation. So I am so thankful to be here again. Paul, thanks for letting me come and be with you as well. Some of you know that I'm the content creator of a YouTube series called the Book of Mormon Editions, where we kind of go through various editions and volumes of the Book of Mormon. And I'm also the director of an endeavor called the Book of Mormon Census Project that I'd like to talk about today. And it's dedicated to documenting early printings of the Book of Mormon. So in this YouTube channel, I have over 130 videos, both of modern and historical copies of the Book of Mormon. It's been fun seeing all of the various restoration branches and their printings of the Book of Mormon. And then also as we do a downward upside down triangle of we all came from 1830 and all of the Kirtland and Nauvoo experiences and things like that. A lot of people have had interest in the videos that I've done regarding the early printings of the Book of Mormon. Specifically, the 1830 was printed in Nauvoo, 1837 was in Kirtland, 1840 edition was in Nauvoo. Did I say 1830? 1830 was in Palmyra, New York. Sorry, guys.
That's correct.
1840 was in Nauvoo. 1841 is in Great Britain, and the 1842 printing was also in Nauvoo. So those first five are what we consider the early printings or within the lifespan of Joseph Smith. And so as I've gone through this, a lot of the questions that have come up is how many of these early printings survive? Specifically like the 1830, how many of the 5,000 copies of the 1830 edition are here today? And how many of their early printings have survived over this time? I've had that opportunity to re-ask book dealers, church archivists, and collectors, and the answer is we don't know. The guesses have been anywhere, specifically just even for the 1830 volume of the Book of Mormon, is anywhere between 200 to 2,000 copies of the 1830. And at first, this is a little surprising. And in second, it becomes a little frustrating because actually no one really knows the survivability of the 1830 Book of Mormon. So what am I talking about on this? We know that in 1830, in March, prior to April of 1830, the Book of Mormon was printed by E.B. Grandin in Palmyra, New York. And obviously, we know that in April, the Church of Jesus Christ, established by Joseph Smith, was established in April of 1830. So it's really interesting that a book was kind of printed before a church started, and the church was started around a book. 5,000 copies were printed. What was interesting is not all of the copies were bound all at once. They usually would print, I'm not saying on demand, but in batches. And it took about 9 months after March of 1830 to actually bind and do bindery on the covers of the Book of Mormon. You'll see in the central picture here, the black cover ribbons actually are offset depending on when the bindery happened, as well as the little gold horizontal lines were actually arbitrary compared to when and who was binding the 1830 Book of Mormon at that particular time. So it's real interesting to see unique and original copies of the Book of Mormon because even the binderies are not uniform. We also know that mob persecution, as the saints moved around and were persecuted by the mobs, a lot of the homes were burned and the items were ransacked. This included copies of the Book of Mormon. And so because of it, a lot of the times your editions of the Book of Mormon would either be lost or destroyed. And so some of the book dealers or as well book collectors will say a 200-year-old book has about a 10% survivability rate for this type of book. And so if 5,000 were printed, you're looking at what, about 500 copies in modern days. The big question is, where are these surviving copies of the Book of Mormon? We notice that it's kind of divided into three groups. Institutional libraries have rare book collections, and these are kind of major universities and actually interesting smaller universities. In the 1930s, they were granted by Congress some funding to actually beef up and bulk up their libraries. And so it's interesting that actually small libraries had an opportunity to kind of purchase these copies of early printings. And so because of it, there's a great opportunity for them to collaborate and have a stewardship to keep in preserved libraries over time. We also know that church archives, both Salt Lake and Community of Christ and other religious or restoration groups have opportunity to keep them, and they put them on display to kind of increase the faith of its membership. And so it's really interesting that the church archives has done a great job preserving what they have as well. We also know a good portion of early copies of the Book of Mormon and other collectible books are in private ownership. These usually are points of conversation for families, that they kind of create a lasting legacy, that they've kept these copies over time in their families or various things like that. And so these three kind of categories are where these early printings of the Book of Mormon reside. And so we had an opportunity to start kind of collecting or asking private institutions, hey, can you give us details of what you have in your rare book sections? What's interesting is the card catalogs of olden times have actually been digitized. And so it's they also share their card catalogs in a database called WorldCat and World Catalog. And when you go to the WorldCat and go into the specific 1830 volume of the Book of Mormon, this particular printing, E.B. Grandin, 1830, we found that there's 152 locations that actually have a copy of the original 1830 Book of Mormon. What was interesting is this is locations. And inside these locations, we have actually multiple copies sometimes in these locations. For example, Brigham Young University had 6, University of Utah had 5. I was impressed that UC Berkeley, a California pretty liberal, non-religious organization, has 4 copies of an 1830 Book of Mormon. And so while we focus on the 1830 Book of Mormon, we know that there's other handfuls of volumes, and we've asked details on them as well. But specifically focusing on the 1830 volume of the Book of Mormon, this is kind of what we're looking at. What was interesting is we started contacting the university saying, hey, can you give us some details, provenance, historical details? They've gone through their bookshelves, and some of them were mislabeled. There are a number of replica volumes. And so they say, oh, oops, we got to change this. And so it's actually been an interesting opportunity for them to update their catalog as well. So out of 152 locations, my guess and my kind of average is about 200 to 250 volumes of the Book of Mormon, of the 1830, specifically the 1830 Book of Mormon. And so it's really interesting contacting university institutions. I'll do a huge shout out to librarians, because librarians want these books to be known as well as shared, and they certainly get their acknowledgement for their stewardship and making sure that they've preserved it over time. In terms of church archives, we've known that church archives do have a privilege of keeping records and books and manuscripts for this. And so because of it, there was a gentleman, a good majority are of 1830 Book of Mormon and other Book of Mormon volumes are in, obviously, Salt Lake Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, as well as in the Community of Christ in Independence, Missouri. What was interesting in talking about Salt Lake specifically, there was a BYU professor by the name of Peter Crawley, who went into the church archives and actually was the first person to start documenting and giving description and details of their 1830 volumes. And he recorded 37 of them. I think about this particular time, more donations, and as people pass away or things like that, they actually gift and estate their copies of the Book of Mormon to the church archives. And it's been said that it's about 50 now in the church archives. This includes copies that are in the Church History Museum, the church library itself, and church visitor centers. I know that the Salt Lake Church has a visitor center in Palmyra at the E.B. Grandin office that has a copy of the Book of Mormon, as well as there's a visitor center in Independence, Missouri that has a copy of the 1830 Book of Mormon. And so these visitor centers are, once again, church assets, and they're archived within the church catalog. I would probably be interested in feedback after this presentation to kind of know more about the Community of Christ. I've heard there's about 20 or so, specifically of the 1830 volume of the Book of Mormon in church archives for the Community of Christ. And so my guess, maybe about 75 to 100 volumes in church archives specifically regarding the 1830 volume. And so in terms of private owners, we've noticed that private owners have a great deal of, I'm going to say pride, but excitement when they own a copy of the Book of Mormon. The challenge is it's hard to quantify how many families actually have a copy of the Book of Mormon, because they keep it pretty private, and rightfully so. When you have an asset this significant, you want to make sure that you keep it confidential as well as anonymous. And so we've seen that they've had these families for years. And one family was interesting. One family I talked to said, yeah, Grandpa had it, and we know that great grandpa had it previously, as well as one family I talked to said, yeah, there's about 4 or 5 siblings, and each sibling has 25% ownership of a copy of the Book of Mormon. And so as a family, they make decisions on who's going to keep it and what the future holds for these copies. Book collectors and book dealers deal directly with these private owners. And they've kind of told me, some of the book dealers have told me that, on average, there would be about 300 volumes of the 1830 Book of Mormon that is actually in private hands. What's interesting is no one has actually done the research to actually get a valid copy count until now. With the 200th anniversary of the Book of Mormon that comes closer in 2030, that's not going to be only 7 years from now, there's an increased interest in early printings of the Book of Mormon. And so begins a need for a Book of Mormon census that we just started this year in 2023. This is an academic study to archive the condition, provenance, and special characteristics of these early copies. So this includes the 1830 printing and other editions as well. What I'd like to address today is the need for and the benefits that go along with having a Book of Mormon census project. We'll also discuss some of the success stories and notable copies that have been recorded so far since we even began this project. This census includes an opportunity for it to be a centralized location. So for all members of the restoration, both either in Salt Lake or Utah or Independence or even outside, have an opportunity to see and gather some information. If you actually have an opportunity to see a physical copy of the Book of Mormon, there's some electricity to it. You can feel the spirit with these, I'm going to say artifacts of the restoration, but it's the opportunity to kind of see something original. And so there's some benefit of having outsiders or people that don't have an opportunity to visit a library or a church museum to see various copies, as well as we can kind of then organize and record the condition and provenance being historical details. The stories behind how these things survived are just as interesting. So the list includes the following. The 1830 volume, as mentioned, it was made in Palmyra. Originally, it was 55,000 originally printed. However, with mob persecution and the saints transitioning over various locations, many have been damaged or destroyed. The 1837 edition was a print run of 3,000 in Kirtland. And if you've seen one of these are actually a pocket size edition. It's really, really, really small compared to the 1830 or kind of a normal book. This was because they were used for missionary use, and you could put them in a breast pocket or a coat pocket, and or like a satchel or a knapsack to bring as missionaries. And so because this was the second printing, many of them were discarded and lost. Everyone wanted all the collectors wanted the 1830 volume. And so the second run was not as desirable, and they were actually used up. The 1840 volume, Paul, you and I have spoken a little bit regarding the 1840 volume that was really interesting. There was a authorized of 4,000 copies. There was an original print run of 2,000, and then an additional imprints ran afterwards. And my guess is that there would probably be less than 1,000 that were in survivability today. It would be really interesting to see these 1840 volumes and where they came from. The 1841 volume was printed in Great Britain. The inspiring fact is that many of those that survive today are in America. And consider this, if they were printed in Great Britain, it meant that these were the ones that were in the hands of migrants from Europe, and the Book of Mormon crossed the seas with these early pioneers. So it's really fun seeing an 1841 volume in America and how and why these volumes came across the ocean. The 1842 volume was similar to the 1840 edition. It was printed in Nauvoo, and it was considered a reprint of the 1840 Nauvoo edition. Fun part about it is only 640 were actually printed and fewer remain. Of course, a key study on the 1842 is if you take the title page out of the 1842 copy, it becomes an 1840. It was lock, stock, and barrel copy of the 1840 volume. So these 1842 volumes are very rare, and it will be interesting to see where these are at. For the Salt Lake group, in 1869, Salt Lake printed the Deseret alphabet, and this was a phonetic alphabet in a new alphabet that helped the migrants of the early Utah Saints learn English. And only 500 were ever printed, and actually many of them were lost or damaged even in the first distribution. So it'll be interesting to see this. One of the universities is really interesting. They have actually a Deseret alphabet department, and they're really interested to see the survivabilities of this Deseret alphabet volume. And then what's interesting that not many people of the Restoration know is that in 1899, the Whitmer family, who left the main volume of the church, organized their own little small branch and created a printing of the Book of Mormon called the Nephite Records. And this 1899 volume was one of the first third-party non-RLDS, non-Salt Lake printings, and very few know about them. Many of the Whitmerite group went into the Temple Lot and the RLDS community. And so many of these 1899 volumes went with those groups as well. And then to open it up, we have honorable mention category. So all of the non-early ones, but that are interesting as well. So case study, or for example, in 2007, a printer made a letterpress replica, and it's called the letterpress replica, and only 750 copies were printed. And so those were numbered. We also have ones that were, one of the ones that I showcase is a Book of Mormon that was printed in the 1900s that was given to a senator while they were going through the polygamy hearings in Congress. And one of the senators was halfway decent to listen to the polygamy hearings in Congress. And so Joseph F. Smith of Salt Lake inscribed a volume to the senator. So we have an honorable mention category as well. So as we get close to the 200th anniversary of the Book of Mormon, it becomes a great opportunity to provide Book of Mormon enthusiasts to experience the Book of Mormon online. So as of September of 2023, which was the 200th anniversary of Joseph Smith being angelically visited, the website of Book of Mormon Census.com was made public. The scope of the census is to collect information on these many early sets, and in order to get a proper copy count and to inspire others to develop their faith in the Book of Mormon. So when we first When we first began this project, we started collecting various rare book collections within specific university libraries. It was interesting that some of the libraries did not know the true significance of what they had. And after discovering that we had started a census, librarians were more than happy to share pictures, documentation, and provenance of these early copies. One example was when the university supplied this copy. And this is the Mary Cahoon copy in the University of Redlands in San Francisco. So there's an inscription that was listed, quote, property of Mary Cahoon, given to her son Reynolds Cahoon, high priest and counsel for the bishop of the Church of the Latter-day Saints in Kirtland, signed Mary Cahoon. We educated the university that the whole the copy given to the mother of Reynolds Cahoon, who is a significant member of the church. What was interesting is he was also as mentioned, a counselor for the bishop, and it was the Church of the Latter-day Saints in Kirtland. And there was only a very few, a short time frame where they labeled it as Church of the Latter-day Saints, and then afterwards they moved it back to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and back and forth. So real interesting on Reynolds Cahoon. What I was interested in is seeing a mother's copy, and this is in her handwriting, and she was just very proud, or at least pleased, that her son would give her a copy, and she would at least inscribe this that says, yeah, my son gave this to me. Another one is in West Virginia. Bethany College is their library holds the Alexander Campbell Library. So many of you know that Alexander Campbell was, him and his father and his brothers organized the Campbellite movement within Christianity. And that was very influential because Sidney Rigdon was a member of the Campbellite movement. And so it was interesting that Alexander Campbell had a copy of the Book of Mormon. It's a little bit notated, and there's a couple underlines, things like that. And it was interesting that one religious leader would have a copy of the Book of Mormon to either cross-compare or just evaluate on his own. So this is Alexander's private copy. Another example was discovering a signature of Joseph Smith III in Plano, Illinois, shortly after the reorganization of the church and the RLDS community. It's interesting that this copy passed through the hands of Joseph III. The original inscription was John Gould, which is a family member, a distant cousin of the Smith family, and it was originally his book. And then it was passed to Joseph Smith III, and it was given to somebody else. And so these books kind of passed hands, and it's interesting that that Joseph Smith III re-gifted or gifted this book to somebody else as well. And so what was also interesting is it does validate that it records as Plano, Illinois. And at that particular time, it was the headquarters for Joseph Smith III in his adult life. This other one is interesting. It's Dr. Philastus Hurlbut's volume. And if you remember Dr. Hurlbut, actually, doctor is not an office. It was actually his first given name given by his mother. So he was not a doctor, but he called himself Dr. Hurlbut. He dissented in the church from the church in 1833 and was one of the people that contributed to the first anti-Mormon volume called Mormonism Unveiled. What was interesting is that this one lists, you guys going to have to educate me on this as well. Geauga County, or Geauga County, Ohio. And I looked at this, and Kirtland, Ohio is actually listed in Lake County. And I had some challenges with this. What was interesting is actually Lake County was changed in the 1900s. And prior to this, it was Geauga County. And so it actually validates that this book actually was Kirtland, Geauga County, Ohio. Once again, Dr. Hurlbut's personal copy as well. Another university admitted that they did not know much about their copies when they submitted this volume to review. This is a Deseret Alphabet Book of Mormon. And at first glance, you see an inscription of Lizzie Sherman presented by Joe Smith, Apostle, Salt Lake, 1870. And at first, it didn't make any sense. However, after some investigation, especially looking into the name of Sherman in the late 1800s, it was discovered that this copy was given by Joseph F. Smith, the nephew of the prophet Joseph Smith, and he was the apostle for the Salt Lake Church to a woman by the name of Lizzie. Most amazing characteristic of this is that this is in the handwriting of her father, William T. Sherman. And you'll recognize him as the notable general for the Union Army during the Civil War. So the university expressed interest that they, appreciation that they discovered that they had a volume that was early church, with early church history in it, and also part of what belonged to an early Civil War general as well. University of Utah was really proud of this particular copy. This is an inscription of Joseph Smith. What was interesting is Joseph Smith did not inscribe or did not write his inscribe his signature in the book, because at that particular time, people didn't autograph their copy. People didn't autograph the Book of Mormon. They wrote in it to identify the ownership. And so the University of Utah actually has a Joseph Smith inscription for their 1830 copy of the Book of Mormon. They also have it's an Emily Hale copy, and more research is needed on this. The kind of the folklore is that this is, and the other one that University of Utah has is an Emma Smith's copy as well. So universities have historically used their endowments to build their library collections, and they become stewards for keeping these early copies of the Book of Mormon. When informed of the Book of Mormon census, many of the first reactions was, "It's about time." And this is a great opportunity for universities to collaborate with the project and give an opportunity for a centralized collection. This is the same with church archives, especially within the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in Utah and the Community of Christ in Missouri. Over time, these churches have acquired various copies, and rightfully so, as these organizations have the privilege of preserving their heritage while sometimes showcasing this for members. One of the highlights in the Church History Museum in Salt Lake City is a simple case displaying Phineas Young's 1830 copy of the Book of Mormon. This specific copy was influential in converting his brother Brigham to the restored gospel. And so it's on display at the Church History Museum in Utah. So in addition, some of the more interesting volumes of the Book of Mormon are held in private hands. I've had a huge admiration for private owners who have kept stewardship over these historical treasures. So while keeping anonymous, and I want to emphasize this, that the private ownership has been kept anonymous, it's been wonderful seeing private owners participate in the census project and for them to understand the lasting legacy they're creating by showcasing these privately owned copies. So even from the start of the project, we've seen that each private copy is unique and special, no matter if it has historical provenance or not. But however, some of the more interesting private copies are as follows. We found Oliver Cowdery's 1837 copy of the Book of Mormon. So as mentioned, Oliver Cowdery was very influential in printing the 1837 volume, and this is his personal copy. The provenance and the folklore on this particular one is that actually Oliver Cowdery bound this copy. The other 1830s are in a simpler one, and this one actually is in a really nice Moroccan belt, red leather with his embossment on it. So this is Oliver Cowdery's private copy. What's also interesting is the 1840 volume in private collection. This one is a normal 1840 book, but in the back is a sticker, and these are called book plates. And book plates are basically stickers to put in books to label ownership of a particular library. And you'll see that this is actually called the Private Library of Joseph Smith, Nauvoo, Illinois. So the history behind this is in 1844, in the winter, or right around January, February of 1844, Joseph Smith made an order of these book plates, and he actually received them. And you'll remember that in 1844, in June, he was martyred. And so he only had a limited time on using these particular book plate stickers. What was also interesting is these book plate stickers passed to the hands of Joseph Smith III. And we know that these book plates were used by Joseph Smith III's in his private library. And so while this is an 1840 volume of the Book of Mormon, we really don't know if this is a Joseph Smith Jr. or Joseph Smith III's volume, but we can say that this is a Smith family volume based upon the book plates, the book plate stickers. This one is a little bit more documented than normal. It is in private collection, but it has been highlighted and showcased in a couple of periodicals and magazines and things like that. This is in the 1830 volume of Reynolds Calhoun that was given to him by Hiram Smith. And yeah, it's changed hands a couple of times. Right from the start of the, let's see. What was interesting is Reynolds Calhoun gave this copy to his son, Pulaski Calhoun, who was a slave owner in Missouri in the 1850s. And when the Emancipation Proclamation came after the Civil War, Pulaski Calhoun gave this copy to an African American family as a means of gifting and an endowment or an endowment to them for, you know, gifts of freedom. And so a African American family had this volume, and they had it for years and years and years, and then it's recently passed hands. So it's really interesting seeing this particular volume and the stories behind it. So right from the start, we've seen some interesting things. One of the ideas is that many times the title page of the 1830 volume has these diagonal shape crease lines. This is called, one of the universities asked us about it, and then we said, yeah, there's actually, it's in many of these first pages, and it's called cockling, and it's due to the aging process and the paper bindery. And basically, as a page shrinks and wears and dries up and deteriorates, this cockling happens on the very first part. It also becomes an identifier. It's kind of a fingerprint identifier because no two pages or title pages are alike in terms of this cockling. We've also seen some interesting textual variations, even in the bindery stages, in beginning stages of this project. For example, it's often in the typeset where they would stop the presses and make a change. For example, in the 1830 preface page, they had a Roman numerals on the back of the preface page, but there's a variant between the Roman numeral 4 and a Roman numeral 6. This is the same with page 144. There's one word, and the word is about, and they stop the presses halfway through the print run, and because they put an O-B-O-U-T instead of an A-B-O-U-T, and so the about word was changed halfway through. And what was interesting is they actually used, when they made the change, they used the old paper and just continued the run and kind of stopped the presses, but did not discard the old printings. This is also with page numbering. In page 212, often, and what's interesting is if you folks have replica editions of the Book of Mormon, you kind of can see these typographical errors on this. One of the more notable one is page 212 is often listed as page 122. What's also interesting is when you have a typeset, the printing process was actually in typeset, and they put individual bits of letters in the printing plate, and as they would print through, the ink would kind of gum up the press, and the paper sometimes would stick to the ink and stick to the type and lift the typeset out completely. And so for page 487, many of them were actually, the 7 was lifted up and lifted out of the printing plate. And so you actually had page 48 would be listed instead of page 487. So there was a missing 7. And then on page 521, you can see that the typesetter sometimes had a frustration with dealing with a longer word, especially when you had to make a printing plate backwards. And then when you printed it, it would be in the proper setting. And so the typesetter ran out of room, and he had to split the word and wrap around with a hyphenated word. So in doing so, he confused the typesetting, and instead of the word murderers with a hyphen, there was something different. And then just blatantly, sometimes there was a blatant that you'd add a letter or so. In the witness page there on line 10, the word seen, we have seen the work is true, or we have seen the engravings which are upon the plates. There's a triple E. This one's a little rare. They caught it pretty quickly, and very few of them have a triple E of the word seen, but it's there. So all in all, with the 200th anniversary of the Book of Mormon coming in the next few years, there's a significant benefit of having a centralized location to document, archive, and digitally display these early editions. This is a multi-year project, and it will be in commemoration of this anniversary and last for years afterwards. So we're reminded, this is the more interesting one, and I'll end with this as well. In 2009, in the Salt Lake General Conference, Elder Holland, which is a member of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles, he held up this copy of an 1841 printing of the Book of Mormon, originally owned by Hiram Smith, while he and the prophet Joseph were in Carthage jail. This is the same. It's now on display in the church library, and it's open for people to see. And so if you're a member of the Salt Lake Church, or if you're not a member of the Salt Lake Church, Elder Holland's words were pretty significant for everybody to hear. And Elder Holland said, quote, "Before closing the book, Hiram turned down the corner of the page from which he read, marking it as part of the everlasting testimony for which these two brothers were about to die. I hold in my hand that book, the very copy from which Hiram read, the same corner of the page turned down, still visible. Later, when actually incarcerated in the jail, Joseph the prophet turned to the guards who held him captive and bore a powerful testimony of the divine authenticity of the Book of Mormon. Shortly thereafter, pistol and ball would take the lives of these two testators." End quote. And every time I talk about this one, I get a little goosebumps on this, and bear with me on this one. This one's a little emotional for me. If you guys ever have a chance to go to Salt Lake in the Church History Library, it's just a visitor center to kind of look. This one is powerful because you can actually see the significance of this book as Hiram Smith's copy that he read in Joseph Smith, as he read to Joseph Smith prior to being martyred. And so this is the testimony that the message of the Book of Mormon can be better valued when the vessel it's contained in can be appreciated also. So I add my personal insights to Elder Holland as well. As the project started recently, it's been truly inspiring to know that there have been stories developing for close to 200 years. There are small miracles that surround the various copies of the Book of Mormon, and it's now our opportunities to bless the lives of others by making a central archive available. So that's the Book of Mormon Census project, as well as the website is bookofmormoncensus.com, and it is live. We batch them every couple of weeks to put more on when people are, when more submissions are there. So that is my presentation. I'm going to stop share screening.
Thank you, Brother Messick. I am so pleased and impressed to see this kind of data gathering, although there may be a certain element of iconography in it. There is also a very special sense of the legacy and the spiritual treasure that we have. I don't want to detract from what you're saying, but I do want to make what I think is a special announcement. I'm in the process of establishing an exploratory committee to go after the, as a bicentennial activity, to see if we can't do an archaeological project investigating the print shop at Kirtland and find remains of the type that was used in the 1837 edition of the Book of Mormon. And because at this stage we have Roger Rose, who is the administrator at Kirtland, excited about it. I believe we have Ryan Salzgiver, who is in charge of archaeology of the historic sites for the LDS, and myself on the exploratory committee. If there's others of you that would like to be on that, like to join us in preparation for that bicentennial activity, to reach across the spectrum of the Smith-Rigdon groups, and to involve, we hope, people from the region as well in this investigation. I'm in hopes that it can be something that is mutually enhancing, give us a chance to work together in our common heritage and pull together more of the information. Because people that have a copy of the 1835 edition of the Doctrine and Covenants, Emma's Hymnal, or the 1837 edition of the Book of Mormon, all of which were printed in that office, then should be able to find direct matching type to match the font that is in those books. All right, now going back to Brother Messick's message, that whole process of making the census, cataloging all this information, is so massive, and I deeply appreciate it. I did not hear anything about the large print edition that was in the late, I think it was about 1890, somewhere around 1890 in Lamoni. And so if you have comments about that, I'd be interested.
Yeah, so I wanted to keep it to the early printings, and I had a personal interest in the 1869 as well as the 1899 Nephite records. What was interesting is anything after 1850 started to become preserved very, very, very well. Salt Lake was established, and then in the 1860s, the RLDS Church was well established. By 1874, the RLDS Church printed their 1874 volume of the Book of Mormon, and then anything after that was actually pretty preserved well. And so for the large volume or things like that, I didn't want to create a personal category. I will say if there are unique ones, for this example, Paul, the large volume that you're talking about, if there is some unique ones, I'd love to put it in the honorable mentions, especially if there's signatures or inscriptions or things like that. So yeah, it is open, but I kind of reserved it for the real early ones because after 1850, not many people burned the books. So,
well, I find today that I'm going to be responsible for the Joseph Smith III Library in Lamoni, and I'm confident that there's some old books there that may very well be of interest to you, and so I'll be happy to continue communicating with you.
Thank you. And I think one of the purposes of me communicating now is I know that there's many individuals inside the Community of Christ or RLDS influence. And so I'd love to make sure that I establish more relationships with those individuals. I know that the archivist for the Community of Christ itself was interested in this. And so I go very delicately talking to church archivists to make sure that they are safe and protected and not pestered with all of the responsibilities that they have. But yes, over time, I look forward to working with church archivists, and I'll probably connect with you privately, Paul, on that, on your library. That would be great.
Thank you. A marvelous presentation again, Robert. Very much appreciated. Deb, go ahead and keep track of the hands if you would, please.
Okay, looks like Val's got the first question. Go ahead, please, Val.
Thanks for your presentation. I appreciate your evangelization on this. I saw you do part of this in the LDS library there with the Book of Mormon Studies Association. You've expanded on it since then, but the the questions I have are, do you know the approximate, I know there'll be a lot of variation based on condition, but the approximate market value of those first 5 editions? And I ask in part, and in part as a follow-up, as libraries reveal to you that they have these things, I'm guessing that in a number of cases, they don't really understand the value of what they have, the market value of what they have, and that becomes clear once you start working with them. And I'm wondering about what kind of measures, security measures, like a little library would have. My guess is these books are actually pretty valuable in many cases.
They are. And with the 1830 volume, it's interesting. Everybody wants an 1830, or like the huge demand is the first edition, 1830. And so the answer is, yeah. I actually had an opportunity to be contacted by a family that said, hey, we just found a Book of Mormon, an 1830 Book of Mormon, and with your YouTube channel, you're the only one that described the 1830. We have one. We don't know what to do with it. And so I talked with them, and they asked me to broker a deal, and I did transact with a book dealer to introduce them to a book dealer. The 1830 volume, you're looking at 6 figures. Just a little higher than 100,000, and it goes higher than that depending on quality and provenance and inscriptions and things like that. So in 1830, you're looking at 6 figures. What's interesting is the 1837 volume, it's actually more rare than the 1830. The challenge is demand is lower because not too many people want an 1837 if they don't have an 1830 volume already. So the 1837 is actually less prevalent in terms of their quantity, but they have their value is lower. The 1840 and 1841, you actually can see them on eBay. Right now, there's 2, or there has been a couple of 1840 and 1841 volumes on eBay that a couple of dealers are selling or have sold. I think in the last 2 weeks, they still are on. And so you can see the values of those. Those are around anywhere between 20 to 40,000, and it kind of depends on the condition and details. What's also interesting, 1841, half of them in Great Britain were printed for missionary use, and so they were printed very low quality, very quickly. The other 1841s were printed with a very scriptive, as I mentioned, the Hiram Smith one that I told you about, the martyrdom copy was very scripted and very ornate in its bindery. And the English or the British people were very known for their decorative covers. So it also depends on the decorative covers, as half of them were straight missionary editions, and then the other half of them were more significant, covers or so. And so, yeah, my litmus test is eBay. You do see 1840, 1841.
So you haven't seen an 1837 price. You don't know what the price of going price of those would be.
I haven't seen an 1837 in a little while. A shout out. I know that the 4 or 5 individuals that I'll connect with is Moonsra Books in Provo, Benchmark Books in Salt Lake. I've connected with John Hychek in Independence. Those folks will always, as well as Brent Ashworth in Provo, Utah. Those folks will always have a kind of their ear to the ground on that, but I actually haven't seen a volume of the 1837 for sale in a while. They're rare, and I think that they're in archives. So
do you know if have you had any libraries where once you told them what they had, you know anything about what they do to protect?
Oh yeah, so the libraries, most of the volumes that were anywhere prior to 1900, they'll usually merge over into their private or their rare books, special collections. And so special collections often is behind one more set of doors. And then, for example, BYU and University of Utah are in vaults. They're one step more. And so I would imagine that universities do have a knowledge of what they have. There's also one called the Huntington, and the Huntington is a library in Utah, or should we, a library in California. And they're one of the ones that have like the Gutenberg Bible and a lot of other things that they know the value of them. So by this time, yeah, I don't think that the 1830 is on their stacks. There was conversation, and you can talk to me privately about it, but there was conversation in the 1980s where a lot of the 1830 volumes of the Book of Mormon were on bookshelves and they started disappearing. And so I think the libraries got smart to put them behind one step, closed doors in private collections, or at least you can't check it out to, check it out the door. It's got to stay in the building. So.
Okay, were you finished, Val? Okay, thank you. David Kaysen and then Dale Warren, you'll next, okay, after David.
Yes, thank you. I just have a couple of questions. One is that in the 1830 volumes, how much were they selling those books for? Because I know they had to pay the printer, and I was wondering how much they were charging for those.
So there were 5,000 books, and Martin Harris leveraged his property for $3,000. So if you look at that, that was 5,000 copies for $3,000, and I believe the Pulaski, the Reynolds Cahoon volume that I talked about that was given by Hiram Smith, I think charged for $1.50 or $1.25. And I think there's a Samuel Smith volume, and I think originally they were for $1.25. And actually in 1830, $1.25 was still high. That was about a day's plus work, or day's wages for back then. So these volumes were pretty high. What was interesting is there's actually conversation that E.B. Grandin was really dissatisfied with this volume, because he kind of told Joseph Smith, look, these are not going to sell. You're not going to make money off of these. And it's true that most of them were used for missionary work. And as missionaries would go out, they'd ask for reimbursement of the printing costs or the price for this, or they were given out just free. And so they were used for missionary work. And, Joseph Smith never made, obviously, Martin Harris never made the money back because he lost the house, or he lost the property. And so, yeah, original $1.25 to $1.50.
Don Carlos Smith in the 1840 Times and Seasons advertised the Book of Mormon that he and Ebenezer Robinson were getting processed through Cincinnati at $1 per copy.
Wow.
And so the price actually went down over that decade.
My other question is the copy that you showed in your presentation of the one that was owned by Oliver Cowdery. Who owns that today?
It's in private collection in Salt Lake. And as mentioned, with private collections, and if you folks have your copies or things like that of the list that I mentioned, I would love to talk with you personally about private copies. And my commitment or my vocabulary is that I will take information and I will keep names anonymous. And you can rest assured that you have got some confidentiality. However, it is in Salt Lake, or it's in Utah in private collection. It's interesting as well, like the really famous copies. It's kind of interesting. For example, the 1830 Hiram Smith one that I told you about was owned by Brent Ashworth, and now it's in the hands of Moon's Rare Books in Provo. It was interesting because they circle around, and people say, well, I'll trade you this one for that one because I've had this one for 10 years and now I'd like to own the next one or the other one. And so it's interesting seeing who has these copies, and they kind of get traded around. for other copies. So yeah.
Well, I just
Sorry, I can't tell you specifically, but it is in private collection.
okay. I just saw on television a couple of weeks ago that someone found a Book of Mormon, an 1830 copy, and it was stored away someplace for years. Nobody had ever looked at it. Anyway, it wasn't in the best of shape, but I guess all of them are not in that great of shape. But anyway, it sold for $137,000.
That's about right. Yeah.
That was on an auction.
Your budget
Right.
is anywhere between 100 to 150. That's right. So what's also interesting is, consider this. These were heavily used, that this was the scriptures of the times. And so they were heavily used. They were passed around. As mentioned, Reynolds Cahoon gave one to his mom, one to his son, and then the son gave it on. The other challenge was E.B. Grandin, not say cut corners, but because they negotiated a low price of 3,000 for 5,000 books, the print quality was not stellar and not spectacular. It was just a normal book. And so they do get deteriorated and over time. Recently, there has been restoration. Both private owners and universities will try to restore their copies. I am a fan, and I realize, and I'm okay with restoration copy or with restored copies. Some of the guys who restore these are really good, that they actually can do a good job. And one of the analogies that they said was, well, consider going to your grandpa's farm and you see an old Porsche in a grandpa's farm. You want to change the oil and clean the upholstery and clean it up to its best condition, as compared to leaving it bad. And it's the same thing with these books, that if a book is deteriorating or deteriorated, they can restore it and it looks not so bad, or pretty good. And consider this: either the book will deteriorate and just be terrible in 10 years time, or you can restore it and have it for another 100 years and have it as useful for people to see for another 100 years. And that's why I'm okay with restored volumes as well.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you,
It
David.
might,
Dale,
oh,
whoops.
it might be a peculiar thing to have
Eb?
people in this church not liking restoration.
Eb, I have a couple of notes that I have taped in my Book of Mormon. Thursday evening, October the 9th, 2014, Ermalou and I were watching Pawn Stars, and a man brought in a hardback copy of the Book of Mormon, printed by Joseph Smith of Nauvoo, dated 1842. An appraiser was called in to evaluate the book, and the lady did very thoroughly, and she placed a value of $40,000 on the Book of Mormon, and they paid the man $24,000 for it. Now that was on October the 9th, 2014. In a 2014 episode of Antiques Roadshow, a Book of Mormon from 1830 was valued at $75,000 to $100,000, in part because it was in good condition and had been handed down within one family.
Mm-hmm.
That was 2014 on those two.
Yeah, so you guys are gonna love this. So the Pawn Star clip, and it's on YouTube, that particular clip. The Pawn Star clip, there was a gentleman that came in and he had the book and he gave it to the Pawn Star guys to evaluate. There was a lady that came in and to evaluate, her last name was Romney, and she is actually a member of the Romney family.
Oh, okay.
And so Miss Romney came in to evaluate the book. I've spoken to both the gentleman who brought the book in, and I've spoken to Romney who evaluated the book. And the guy who actually presented the book, he is actually a well-known book dealer in New York. And he's actually well-known, and he's done it a couple of times to go to Pawn Stars to kind of show off him and say, hey, if you're in New York, here's my name, things like that. And so it was kind of not say gimmick, but it was interesting that he went to Pawn Stars and swapped out the 1842 copy of the Book of Mormon. So I've talked to him, And yeah, he did give the 1842 for 26,000. And I talked to Romney, and she is actually a well-known book dealer in Washington, D.C. And she knows her stuff, and she's really good on knowing her stuff. So I know that it transacted. I haven't followed up with Pawn Stars and or the producers to find out where it went after that. But I would really interesting, because that's actually provenance, that when we record that volume, or when we find that volume, we can say this volume was showcased in Pawn Stars. And that actually creates a level of coolness for that particular volume.
Right. Oh, that's
Thank
so-
you. We were watching that. I just had to make notes about it. It was great. Okay, thank you, Deb.
So the other
Oh.
one is, you had mentioned the Roadshow.
Antique Roadshow
Antique
in
Roadshow.
2014.
So that was when, that was the 1830, and that was done by Ken Sanders.
Oh,
So Ken Sanders of Utah is the other rare book store in Utah. They've done some transitions recently that they're actually changing out of their bookstore into another location, and they're kind of in hodgepodge in terms of moving their volumes over. And so he deals with normal books and also antique books. So I've connected with him, and I've said, hey, if these early copies go through your hands, would you refer me, or at least let me, get some details? Once again, private copies I will keep anonymous. Let's just archive them. And nice gentleman. I've actually purchased a couple of them. Yeah, interesting. 1908 first copy of the RLDS edition was in Ken Sanders, and I purchased from him. So that was Ken Sanders. That was at Antique Roadshow.
Wow.
you.
Okay, looks like Jonathan Neville, welcome back. Good to have you. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I always enjoy being here when we can. I was wondering how many libraries allow you to handle the books. And the reason is, we went to Dartmouth a few years ago and asked for their copy, and they brought it out. And we could hold it, flip through the pages, just treat it like any book. Other libraries are more careful. And do you have a sense for where you can handle one of these?
Good question. And in general, I've actually seen that librarians are very accommodating if they know that you are respectful for what they have. And so if you would call ahead of time, say, hey, I'm doing research, or I'd like to visibly see this particular copy, to schedule an appointment, they're usually very accommodating to do so. They usually will have some requirements to say, put it in a book cradle. A book cradle is a V so that it doesn't fold completely down. It actually stays there. A couple things like that. Don't put it, keep it on the table, or, do pages lightly, those things like that. But in general, I think librarians are kind of desperate to get attention for their volumes. And so because of it, they will side on the welcoming as compared to the protective. So you mentioned Dartmouth, which is interesting. If you look on the census, we recorded Dartmouth's one, and in the 1830 volume, obviously it was no versing, just a novel form. And in the 1840s, there was a pamphlet that was printed that gave reference guides to page numbers for various stories. And the Dartmouth College one has that pamphlet that's tipped in, or glued into the back of their volume. And so if you go on the website and see Dartmouth College, you'll actually see that reference guide, it was a third-party printing. Some guy in Nauvoo just did a printing to kind of make a couple of bucks. And every so often you actually have these pamphlets that are inside the back of the volume, and the Dartmouth College has one. What's also interesting is I've seen experiences where church leaders will call the university and say, hey, we have a teenage youth group that has a night, or a teen night or something like that. Would you allow us to come to the library and see an 1830 copy of the Book of Mormon? And it's actually interesting hearing the stories and the testimony stories of these teenagers going and seeing a 1830 copy of the Book of Mormon at their local university, and the inspirational stories that they come back with on that. And so the youth leaders have organized this. The Lilly one at University of Indiana did it a couple of times, and quite a few of the universities will be catering to like a youth group to come experience it for their first time as well.
Yeah, we noticed that insert at the end of the one in Dartmouth as well. One other comment is a few years ago, a friend of mine asked me to come over. He wanted to show me something. And so I went over to his house, and he had an original 1830 edition. And he said, I don't know how many of these you've held. And I said, well, not many. So he let me hold it, and I flipped through it. I opened the cover, and his grandkids had scribbled crayons all over the inside pages. So he told me, I know this is worth a lot of money, but my grandkids are more important to me than this book. But I wonder if that's one you found. Have you found one that has crayons all scribbled in it?
No, and if you want to connect with me personally about it, I'd love to hear about it. As well, I'll give an invitation for those of you who have friends of friends of friends who have these early printings. My commitment is I would love by 2030, I would like to get the confidence of archiving all of these early printings. And so for your friend like this, by all means, I've seen worse than crayons in copies of the Book of
Sure.
Mormon. So because of it, I would love to get details so that we can archive all of them and have a good copy count or a good confidence of survivability details by 2030 of the 200th anniversary. And my sales
cool.
pitch, or my pitch to private individuals is, once again, I will keep information confidential, as well as it becomes a lasting legacy for the owners to be proud that they're part of the census for the 200th anniversary. I do put a letter of certification with a little bookmark that says, if you ever pass this on to somebody else or sell it, please recognize that it's been listed already, and you can pass this to the new owner that it's been listed. And so I'm really excited that private owners have an opportunity to participate in this. So I would love referrals for those of you who know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody, to have them contact me. And I would love to talk details so that they are confident about this as well.
Cool. Well, thanks so much. It's a great presentation.
Thank you, John.
Deb's frozen. Then Terry, go ahead.
Okay, great presentation. I really enjoyed it. The work that's gone into doing all that is phenomenal. I applaud you. Two things came to mind in the presentation. One, the Reynolds Cahoon Book of Mormon. Reynolds Cahoon was basically what we'd call the superintendent of the construction of the Nauvoo Temple. And he was in charge of all the money and all the supplies and everything that went into the temple. He fell away from the church at some point after that and moved to southwest Iowa and started his own little group there. The rest of the family went to Utah, but he stayed in Iowa at that time. Anyway, so I think it's an interesting character to see that Book of Mormon. The other point is that Holland talk that came from conference. When we were in Nauvoo, and this would have been in 2017, my wife and I, we were assigned to be at the Carthage jail one Sunday afternoon. That little conference segment from Holland, where he talks about the Book of Mormon, the little video of that is used in the Carthage Visitor Center to introduce people to the importance of the Book of Mormon and what happened there. There was a rumor that day that Russell M. Nelson, who at the time was not the president of the church, he was the chief apostle in the church at that time, and there was rumor that he was going to be in Nauvoo, but nobody except maybe the mission president knew what was going on. So we're just sitting there waiting for visitors, and he shows up with this little entourage, and he comes in. And when groups like that come into the visitor center, the first thing you do is head to the bathroom. Well, President Nelson headed right into the room where they showed that video. And I'd wanted to talk to him about something else. And so I went in there and talked to him about what I wanted to do. Anyway, our mission president, Garth Hall, had heard rumors that the church was going to pull that video from the visitor center there. Well, it's a very impactful segment. And so President Hall took care of the visitors in the foyer there, and then he comes into the area where they showed the video, and I'd already done my business with President Nelson, so I left. So anyway, President Nelson or President Hall wanted to let him know how important that video was to the visitors, and the spirituality that it presents to people going through the Carthage jail. The result of that, I guess, is that video was never pulled. And so it was continued to be in use in the Carthage jail. And I don't know if it still is or not, but it's an amazing little blurb about the events from the Carthage temple and holding up that Book of Mormon that belonged to Hiram. So thank you.
Very good. Thank you for the insight. That's really cool that they use that video. It's, if you see it, or if there's a clip on YouTube, I pulled it from the General Conference website for, through the LDS websites. It's impactful. It really kind of will move you in terms of the validity of the Book of Mormon, the martyrdom of Joseph Smith and Hiram Smith, and all they went through to make sure that the restoration continued. So thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Deb, I think you're muted, so I'll go ahead. I saw that video at Carthage Jail this summer, and it was still there being used very impressively. I'd like to go back to the earlier, more specific kind of details, because I've been digging at the Times and Seasons in Nauvoo for the 1840 edition, and we have 2,000 copies that Ebenezer Robinson was able to get while he was in Cincinnati, but Joseph authorized 4,000. And there would have been a shift in the location of the Times and Seasons, well, that is to say, they had 2,000 in October of 1840. By 1841, they then moved across the street west to the third Times and Seasons building. And so how many, is there any difference in the other possible 2,000 copies that may well have been printed in those two buildings? Can anything be determined or ascertained to see which of those sites those books might have come from?
In general, yes. So you're absolutely right. 2,000 copies were originally printed in Cincinnati. And my guess is once we get more copies of the 1840 recorded, we'll kind of see a pattern on it. But my guess is that the 2,000 copies were bound simultaneously, so that those copies or those covers are specifically for the Cincinnati printing, if you will. When they came back with the printing plates. And this was the first time that it was in stereo printing, which basically means that they did the typeset. They made a wax cover or the wax, excuse me, wax impression, and then made a printing plate that they could use over and over and over. I have heard that the 1840 printing plate was dropped. And so your later what's called impressions that Robinson, Don Carlos Smith passed away during the time, and so Robinson was the only person that had ability to print, or was the printer of that time, and so he would print in batches, and there are a number of impressions that he would, or batches that were done. And I've been told that over time there is variations to the impressions, and my good friend Ryan Daly kind of knows a little bit more about the variations of the 1840 impressions than I do. And so if I actually got pictures of an 1840, or if they said, hey, which impression was this, I'd probably refer it to Ryan Daly to say, help me understand, because I do think that I was told that one of the corners was dropped, or the printing plate was dropped, and one of the corners of the printing plate kind of bent. And so you can see, oh yeah, on page so-and-so, this particular corner had a blemish that was after the drop versus prior to the drop. And so the answer is yes, you can determine impressions, but I'd have to refer to an expert on it.
Wow. Ladies and gentlemen, can you appreciate the detail that goes into an answer like that? Wow, this is just awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay, who's next? Carol had put a comment in and she had seen it a week ago, Monday. Is that what you said, Carol, on Antiques Roadshow, that they had an 1830 copy that went for 125,000 last week?
Wow. Yeah, that's about right. More than my budget. I don't think I'll ever I'll do it, but I can certainly appreciate from a distance. How about that?
Yeah.
I'm curious, Robert, your census of the Book of Mormon, but Doctrine and Covenants 1835 to me would also be a matter of significant interest. That's a separate project?
Yes, and because I've got, not say limited resources, but my YouTube channel is Book of Mormon editions. I'm focused on English versions of the Book of Mormon. Same thing with this Book of Mormon census. You can census everything if you really wanted to, if you had all the time and resources. But I think I've chosen to just look at the copy of the Book of Mormon. I was told that one of the archivists inside, like the head of the rare book collection inside Brigham Young University, started doing a census on the Book of Commandments, which is actually a even more rare volume. And I think that he also included the 1835 Doctrine and Covenants, that he was starting to kind of record details. So I think the project is around. I'm not sure how detailed it is, or how expansive it is, but I think gracefully I will probably pass it to somebody else who has the opportunity to do that specifically. Well, other people, one is on my list that I need to batch soon. It's in my queue, and it was given to me, I went to see it, and it's not posted, but I'll give you kind of a little teaser on a next batch or some batch later. Is went to Utah State University in Logan, Utah, and they actually have David Whitmer's copy of the book of the 1830 Book of Mormon. So it was really interesting to find David Whitmer's copy. And so little teaser that it's not posted yet, but sooner or later we'll get around to posting that on the website as well. So I was excited that officially we found David Whitmer's copy of the Book of Mormon as well. So
what was the catalyst that got you started on this process?
An empty bookshelf. Actually, this bookshelf behind me, I was gifted it right after college, and it was so empty that one of my buddies' grandma passed away, and he was giving away his books, and he was giving away all of his LDS books. And so I got all of his LDS books, and I found that I had extra shelf space. And so because of it, I figured I needed to fill up a shelf. And so I did various copies of the Book of Mormon. One of my first one was the 2009 Doubleday edition of the Book of Mormon that was sold through like Barnes and Noble and Borders Books. It was the volume that Salt Lake gave to Doubleday to print. And so that was the first one that opened my eyes to say, oh, there's various covers of the Book of Mormon. And so it kind of morphed as collecting the book to fill a bookshelf. into understanding why various ones were printed or so. And so I think my last list has 150 specific volumes of the Book of Mormon. Most of them are modern. And then probably about 200. I've got duplicates of some as well. So it's been fun. You know, my wife says, well, if you have a hobby, you might as well have this hobby. And so God bless her for allowing me to be an enthusiast of the Book of Mormon, to collect it.
Oh, wow. That's awesome. Thank you. I'm most intrigued by your response to my earlier question, and I'm wondering if possibly those 1840 editions that would have been batch bound by Robinson. Of course, he had the stereotype plates, but if he was binding those separately, there probably would be some, like you saw the distinctions on the 1830 editions that had different lining and the decorations did not quite match because they're published over a period of several months.
Yes.
I would guess the same would have been true in 1840.
Correct. And I think the census has a handful of the 1840 volumes. And what's been interesting is as we've connected with universities, we focused on the 1830 volume, and they said, and we've asked, well, while you're doing that, would you give pictures of other copies as well? And so of the 1840 volumes that we've seen, they have had multiple covers. And my guess is that, yeah, Robinson actually did the bindery in batches, and probably with the materials that he had available for that particular month or that particular time. So it will be very interesting to keep you in the loop, Paula, regarding the 1840 volumes that come through. That yes, there were variations to the covering, and it was based upon the impressions that Robinson had materials at the time to make bindery on it. So,
well, that's an exciting verification of our thesis that there were more of them printed at Nauvoo. So thank you. That is great.
Okay. Val, go ahead, please.
So two questions. They're sort of related. Grant Hardy has said, has reformatted the Book of Mormon in various ways, as you probably know, and a lot of readers I've heard, when they see these different ways of formatting the book, they come to sort of understand it differently than they otherwise would. That the layout makes a difference to them in as they read it, in kind of the feel of the story and what they understand about the story. So my two questions are, as you've looked at all these different editions, have you gained any insights into the Book of Mormon that was a function of the different layouts or the way the things are put together that's caused you to appreciate the Book of Mormon in a different way? And secondly, apart from the physical properties of the Book of Mormon, what are the favorite parts of the Book of Mormon? Like, do you have favorite things in the Book of Mormon, things you really love about the Book of Mormon that you could just tell us about its content, not about its physical attributes?
Great question. So I'll give a shout out to my YouTube channel, Book of Mormon Editions on YouTube. And actually just this weekend, I did this volume, and this is Grant Hardy's volume. And it's called the Annotated Book of Mormon. And Grant Hardy was known for printing also a reader's edition of the Book of Mormon. And so both the annotated and this reader's edition of the Book of Mormon, he does reduce the versification of the text so that you can read it in novel form better. And then with the annotated volume, there is some annotations or some explanations of that particular page and that particular details. And so for the Salt Lake group and anybody else that wanted to read it, I do like this annotated volume of the Book of Mormon. It's interesting because Salt Lake recently made a request for Deseret bookstores or Deseret book printing not to print what we call study editions of the Book of Mormon, to have maybe outsiders be okay around doing study guides, but not really the church endorse a study guide of the Book of Mormon anymore. And the idea behind it is we have the missionary Salt Lake edition of the Book of Mormon, or regular scriptures, and we can read from the scriptures and gain our own gleaning rather than being biased around somebody else's research, if you will. However, they'll be glad around Grant Hardy's volume of the Book of Mormon as well. And so it's really interesting seeing how much study or supplemental material will be in a study guide. My kind of ones that I like is the annotated Book of Mormon by Grant Hardy, the Maxwell Institute Book of Mormon. A real big one is the Book of Mormon Made Easier. It's a 3-volume set. And so those are great study editions. And so, yeah, I really had a good opportunity to do that. One of the ones that I like is the last name of Perry. He was a BYU professor or a professor or whatever. Perry did a chiasmus chiasmus formatted Book of Mormon. And so he took all of the chiasmus, the A, B, C, D, C, B, A scriptures, if you will, and kind of indented them to create a visual understanding of various scriptures or things like that inside the Book of Mormon. And so I really do like interesting formats that are useful to visually see, lists and his swords and his shields and his bows and his breastplates, listed down, or like the oars, this or that or that or that in list form in a scripture text. So it's really interesting seeing scripture, study guides. I'll give my personal insight that I am a huge fan of the Book of Mormon, both physically as well as spiritually, that reading the Book of Mormon really impacted my life. And for readers of the Book of Mormon, whether you read it straight from scriptures or straight from the novel form or straight from the 1830 or straight from a study guide, there is some insight that says there's something to this volume that's not just an immature farm boy from the 1830s. And so you guys can take that for what it's worth. That's, you can kind of determine your own level of intensity on the Book of Mormon, but actually coming through and evaluating all of these copies of the Book of Mormon and all of the printers and all of the people who decided to, produce their own volume of the Book of Mormon actually gives me some insights to say, the more I study it, the more I like it. So that was the Grant Hardy one. And then insights. Oh, you guys are going to like this. So I have one. It is a replica 1830. And as I mentioned, in 2007, there's a book printer that did, that asked, what would it take to replicate the 1830 volume of the Book of Mormon? So they matched the paper, they matched the cover, and they actually hand pressed all of the paper on actually one of the original hand press, the Smith press of the time. And so they actually created 750 of these volumes. And what was interesting is this is called the letterpress volume of the Book of Mormon. And so it's an 1830 replica. What was also interesting is there was a gentleman that had various pages of an 1830 that was deteriorating. The cover had gone bad. And he decided to put in copies, or put in pages of the 1830. And so there's usually like one or two pages of an 1830 volume of the Book of Mormon that's in here. And I have one, and it's the last 2 pages of Moroni, which is the Moroni chapter 10. And in Salt Lake, it's verse 4 and 5. And it's the Moroni promise that if you read these things, ask God if these things are true, he'll manifest the truth of it by the power of the Holy Ghost. And I have the 1830 pages of that particular one. And so always that's my favorite volume and my favorite story inside the book. So yeah, pretty significant for me. Academically, I want to make sure that I stay academic to say, yes, we're recording details, condition, provenance, historical details. But deep down inside, there's some spirit to it that says this is a cool experience to get so close to both physical, and then as you read it, it grows on you as well. So
the guy that did the poetry stuff, that's Donald W. Perry. And
Yes.
that is a very nice version for seeing the rhetoric, that's essentially the poetry and rhetoric, not just the chiasmus. He has that, but there's all kinds of sort of poetic rhetoric in the Book of Mormon that's all laid out very nicely in that version.
Yeah, it's called Poetry and Parallelisms in the Book of Mormon by W. Don Perry. So yeah.
I
Go ahead,
appreciate,
James.
oh, go ahead. If there's somebody else raise their hand, go ahead.
Yeah, James Lucas, go ahead.
Okay, just to literally follow up on that very point, the exact title of Don Perry's book is Poetic Parallelisms in the Book of Mormon, or something like that. And I just, because I only just literally ordered it, I can report from a book buyer's point of view that apparently he had first done it and it had gone out of print, but he has arranged to have editions of that now made available on Amazon. I guess he self-published, and it's available in both a hardback and a paperback versions. So that is an interesting volume, which I've just like I said, literally just ordered, because it sounds like it is very interesting. But it's Poetic Parallelisms is the first couple of words in the title. And it does go beyond just chiasmus. It has the whole book is reformatted to emphasize the poetic structures that would have appeared in Hebrew, because he was a professor of Hebrew or he is a professor of Hebrew, emeritus now, I believe. My question, though, was in your census, have you noted whether copies have not just inscriptions as to ownership, but actual marginalia or underlining that would indicate notes from the original owner's study of the particular copy? Or is that something that goes beyond what you would put into your census?
Great question. You're gonna like this one. Still to come, and I've got the pictures and the details, and now I need to do the write-up to drop it into the website. But we found Frederick G. Williams's volume of the Book of Mormon. Frederick G. Williams. Let me make sure I got it. And in that copy, it is highly annotated, and the annotations actually are okay, never mind. We found Frederick G. Williams's copy of the Book of Mormon, and there are annotations of it. So what's interesting is the two annotations that are in, the two styles of annotations that are in is Frederick G. Williams was called to be a missionary to the Lamanites in the Western lands. So basically, he was one of the people that went to Missouri, Ohio to speak to the Native Americans. And so there's annotations regarding parallels to the Native Americans and how to preach or how to be a missionary inside the margins of this Book of Mormon. The other part about it is this volume was in the School of the Prophets in Kirtland. And so because of it, there's some marginalia and some annotations regarding School of the Prophets and or kind of some good doctrine that the School of the Prophets would do. And it was the volume that was used in the School of the Prophets. So the answer is yes. It's really interesting that you can see it. If most of the time when there is annotations, they usually know who did it because they usually did an inscription. So we know that this is Frederick G. Williams because of his handwriting. For example, like the Campbell volume that I showed you actually did have quite a few underlines and markings, either for or against, to kind of compare the Campbellite thought versus the Mormon thought in it. And so it does actually interesting. It kind of, the Hurlbut one that he was the first anti-Mormon in 1833. He had a couple underlines. And so it actually gives a really interesting provision regarding the owner and what they thought was interesting for that particular time. So
I have been negotiating with Joseph Johnston, who has Lucy Macksmith's Book of Mormon, and its annotations, I think, are going to be coming onto the forum as soon as we can get that arranged.
oh, Paul, if I could ever have some conversation with you, that would be kind of certainly a crown jewel in the census as well. So sooner or later.
It's marvelous resources becoming available, isn't it?
Yeah.
Thank you so much for what you're doing.
So James Lucas, a follow up on that as well. A shout out to the YouTube channel. If you've not seen it, I actually did a video review of Perry's poetic parallelisms of the Book of Mormon, and so it's on there, and at least you can see some pictures and some kind of formatting on it. So I was excited to see that one. So thanks for your comments on that too.
Okay, well, thank you for putting this all together and for the interesting presentation.
Bill Shepard,
I mean, it would be, I guess a follow-up question. In your census, will you, so what will you say if there is marginalia or study notes or something, or you just note that the volume has marginalia, study notes, or whatever in it, or will you try to actually note in it maybe the actual substance or a little summary of what parts of the book of the particular copy have been underlined or annotated or whatever? I mean, how much detail do you think you'll try to get into on those kinds of things?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it kind of depends on the volume itself. Sometimes if it's just underlines or like tick marks or things like that, I'll say various notes and annotations on the margins. Here's the other challenge. Often what I ask is like a picture of the spine, a picture of the cover, a picture of the title page, a picture of like the I-Nephi, first Nephi page, maybe the witness page, and a couple of pages inside it if there's significant or kind of interesting annotations or markings. So I don't want to be intrusive to say, will you send me a picture of every page? So I'm kind of limited on what they give me. And if I have an inside text page that has something, I'll say, hey, various annotations throughout the book. If they send me information, for example, the person that had the Frederick Williams, he actually did the evaluation with Brigham Young University, and there's a lot more commentary. And so I can say that, yes, there are annotations that were directly for missionary purposes to the Lamanites. There were annotations that were directly for the School of the Prophets because that was already already researched. So it really kind of depends on if the research has been done or if it's just scribbles that I don't know why that they did it. So it kind of depends volume by volume, and it will depend on how much information that particular donor gives to me so that I can post it. So.
Okay, thank you.
I'm curious about the acidic factor in the paper. Because of a wide assortment of papers used, but the greater the acidity, the faster the deterioration, is my understanding. Do you have any kind of range on the possible durability because of that factor?
The paper itself has been done pretty good. For the example of the 1830, you'll have what's called foxing. And foxing is around the perimeter of the page. It's starting to become brown spots on the pages, if you will. And that's actually towards oxidation. The more the pages are flipped, the more your oils are on the pages itself, the more foxing does. I've actually seen that the two factors that actually cause condition of a book is water damage. That there's water damage that happens either, some Mormon pioneer, is up to his boots in creek water as he goes through to Utah or so and drops a Book of Mormon, or we actually have one that had fire damage and they actually did have some char marks to it. And so in terms of deterioration, it actually is artificial deterioration, like water damage, like this, more than the paper itself. The paper is pretty durable, not too bad. But certainly if there's water damage or water staining, that'll be more of a factor on how well it's conditioned. The other factor is, in terms of a condition, the cover is more of a factor of condition than the papers itself. And once again, the papers actually stand up pretty well. Shy of it being in the sunshine forever and ever, they really are in bookshelves so that the ink really doesn't fade. But the covers are really what gets opened and opened and opened and opened, and the leather dries out. And so you have a lot of dry rot on the covering, far more than deterioration of papers, if you will. So this is also what a restorationist will do, is they'll usually stop the dry rot and maybe reinforce the hinging of the covers. And so we've actually seen the condition of the covers as a factor compared to conditioning of the paper.
And can the restorer fix the cockling as well?
Yeah, the cockling's pretty cool. And this is interesting. It's also with only the first front covers or front pages. The first 3 or 4 pages actually have the cockling, and anything inside actually doesn't. What happens is the inside pages are smashed so much that they really don't wrinkle, but the first front, especially if you put a book this way, the first front has less weight than inside the cover, and so the first few pages will cockle as compared to the whole volume. What was I going to say? Oh, in terms of the 1830, they evaluated the paper, and it was actually a cotton rag that they actually did a cotton blend inside the 1830 volume of the Book of Mormon. So actually is really, really light. So go.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, Jonathan Neville says 1 page of an 1830 volume is, I have some problems around it. They're right around $1,000 now for a single page of a Book of Mormon. And I kind of feel like that is way too high. And maybe I'm still used to a couple of years ago, or even like 10 years ago, they were a few $100s. And everything since maybe 2 years ago, like post-COVID, has kind of doubled in price in terms of Book of Mormon collecting or memorabilia collecting. So I see that the page, yeah, I was looking at that one, and an 1830 single page, $1,250. That hurts to purchase. And so I've luckily I have a couple of pages that are that I got for maybe a couple $100, and anything higher is I'm just waiting a little bit. Now, in terms of an individual 18th page of an 1830 paper, it's interesting. About every page has a significant story or a significant phrase or a significant verse. So when you're looking for an 1830 single page, it kind of is interesting on what page you get or what page is available and what story that page has that actually makes a value for that page. So if you ever are shopping for an 1830 single page, find the story that you like. Will determine your cost. So
I'm kind of concerned about this single page stuff. If it starts selling at that price, somebody's going to unbundle a Book of Mormon and sell it off page by page, and that would be bad.
Yes. So once again, check my videos. There's a video of a story by the name of a lady by the name of Helen Schlee, 2010 through 2017. She actually did that. She had a full copy of the Book of Mormon, and she started separating the pages and putting them in kind of nice decorative frames and things like that. And that was controversial that she split copies of a Book of Mormon into individual pages to sell off. And her stance was that she wanted the Book of Mormon, or the 1830 Book of Mormon, to be influenced by more people. And she figured distributing it to more people would have more of an influence rather than one book at one place. And so call it what you will. But yeah, the answer is the sum of the book should be better and more important than the individual parts. So you are absolutely correct. This is backwards to sell individual pages when they should be in full copies. So
Dale, you need to unmute, please.
I just happen to think I had a couple of old Book of Mormons on the library, and one is printed by it's the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints publishers, and Northern States Mission, published in Chicago in 1908.
Yay. So that is interesting. Prior to 1920, the various missions inside Salt Lake would actually commission the Chicago printer to commission their missionary copies. And so they actually did have an ability to print the mission address in the front cover. So those 1908 copies are what's called the missionary editions. Once again, they were commissioned by the missions itself for their distribution inside their mission. So there was about 5 or 6 missions of that particular time.
I don't know where I may have picked that up at, but anyway, I just happened to think about it. And then I got one published by the Reorganized Church of Jesus Christ, 19 and 23.
That's amazing. That's great. So Reorganized 1923. That's
Yeah,
fun.
19 and 23. So I just happened to think about those 2 old books that I just thought about. But one is published in Chicago in 1908, and this one published by the church. It says, compared with the original manuscript and the Kirtland edition of 1837, which was carefully examined and compared with the original manuscript by Joseph Smith and Oliver Cowdery. I wasn't aware of this one, but it was 1923. So I've got a couple of old books there that I picked up somewhere.
That's great.
Yeah. They're hard covers. Okay, thank you.
Bill Shepard had his lean forward a little while ago, and I think he wanted to speak.
I'd be curious about the date and the places of publication, say for the first 5 or 6 LDS, and a little bit on the RLDS. When were theirs printed?
So interesting. When Brigham Young went to Salt Lake Valley, he had a copyright for the 1841 printing of the Book of Mormon in Great Britain. And so from 1840s through the 1850s, even through 1870s, all of the life of Brigham Young was actually printed in Great Britain and then shipped over to America as needed. And so, yeah, it wasn't until 1879 that after Brigham Young's passing that they started printing in Salt Lake or printing for Salt Lake. In terms of the RLDS volume, 2 things happened. The folks there that were unorganized had the 1840 copy of the Book of Mormon. In 1858, there was a volume called the James O. Wright volume of the Book of Mormon. And that story is amazing. If you go on YouTube and do Ryan Daly's 1858 volume of the Book of Mormon, he kind of talks about it, that James O. Wright was the first person that printed the Book of Mormon third party and tried to sell it to the people of the East Coast because the Mormons in the West Coast were a sensational conversation. And so he wanted to sell the Book of Mormon on the piggyback of all of the sensationalism in 1858, and it just didn't print well and just didn't sell well. Well, there was a group of members in the Midwest that hadn't followed Brigham Young that would later become some of the RLDS groups. They actually contacted him and said, we want those copies of the Book of Mormon. Would you negotiate us to have them? So it's the 1858 James O. Wright volume that they had until 1874. And in 1874, Joseph Smith III printed a 1874 RLDS volume of the Book of Mormon. What was interesting is he kept the printing date of 1874 and used the printing plates over and over until the 1890s. And so if you have an 1874 volume of the book of a RLDS Book of Mormon, that printing time frame is from 1874 through the 1890s. So officially, that is the first RLDS Book of Mormon. And then in 1908, prior to that, the RLDS Church obtained the printer's manuscript from the Whitmer family. And with the printer's manuscript, they went through and overhauled the Book of Mormon and did a 1908 printing of the Book of Mormon that's become the benchmark printing for the RLDS and Community of Christ. So in terms of RLDS, your benchmarks is 1874 and 1908 are your benchmark volumes of an RLDS Book of Mormon.
Thank you.
Okay, Ron Smith, go ahead, please.
Well, I'm sure that most of you are probably aware of it. You were talking about the Book of Mormon that had the parallelisms and so on. There's the Restored Covenant edition that was put out by Zarahemla Press, and it has the they went back to the printer's manuscript and tried to restore the original wording and put the parallelisms, and they don't they have the words of Christ in red, and it's kind of a nice copy. And so since you mentioned the other one, I thought I'd just put that one out there too. So
Yeah, so I did a review on that one, and a really nice one. I contacted one of the publishers on it, or one of the guys who's done it, and they did a really good job on that one. And I was really impressed. And yeah, it's thoroughly used by the members of the Restoration Inside Independence, and it's kind of branched out from there. And I'm glad that they use it and that it's available for Restorationists. I know with the Community of Christ and prior to 1984 and kind of the shifts with all of the various groups, you have the remnant branches that use that a lot inside the traditional RLDS traditions. So very
Right.
good, very good volume.
Yeah.
Let me comment on that, because it has become my favorite edition, and that's even after my grandmother Audrey Stubbert was one of the proofreader and in part the editor for the 1966 edition, which reduced the size of the book significantly by taking out a bunch of the duplications.
Okay, James Lucas, go ahead, please.
Just a quick question about a comment you just made about the RLDS edition. When I was with Jonathan and I were working on our book By Means of the Urim and Thummim, I had occasion to read through the journals of Edward Stevenson, and he mentioned on one of his visits to David Whitmer in the 1870s that a committee from the reorganized church had just been to David Whitmer's house to go through the printer's manuscript, which of course David Whitmer was holding at the time, in preparation for doing a printing of the Book of Mormon. So I took from that first 1870s RLDS Book of Mormon was also, they had researched, gone to David Whitmer and checked it, gone through the printer's manuscript to proof the text and so forth. Is that now that was not the focus of my research, so I kind of didn't take down the citation or note it, but I remembered David, at least Stevenson, recording that David Whitmer made quite a point out of the fact that, it was like 4 or 5 guys besides, Joseph Smith III and a bunch of other guys, and that they'd spend days going through the printer's manuscript. But this would have been in the 1870s when David Whitmer was still alive. So I'm just wondering, is that something that jives with the research that you have, or is that a piece of information that you hadn't come across before?
I'm pretty confident that happened. So the answer is yes. In 1874, they were preparing to create, 1874 is the publication of the RLDS volume. And so prior to that, the scripture committee is working to get this done. And so the answer is yes. David Whitmer was very friendly still to the members of the Restoration. And so the history behind that is Oliver Cowdery had the printer's manuscript, and he left the church with Whitmer's in 1838 in Missouri, and he kept the printer's manuscript with him. 1850, he wrote a letter to Brigham Young saying, hey, I want to come back to the church. I don't want leadership. Would you allow me back in? Brigham Young says, yes, come on in, make your plans. So while he was making plans, Oliver Cowdery passed away in 1850. All of Oliver Cowdery's estate went to the Whitmer family. And so that's how the printer's manuscript ended up with the Whitmer family. And so the answer is yes, David Whitmer had the printer's manuscript through, and he was in Richmond, Missouri, which is right there and everywhere else. And so members, if Joseph Smith III was in Illinois and coming back down to Independence and back and forth, then yeah, they would know that David Whitmer is local, and David Whitmer was friendly to members of the Restoration and would allow inspection of the printer's manuscript to that scripture committee as they were preparing for their volume as well.
Okay, thank you.
Let me add to that I remember reading about that Joseph III arranged for 3 men. Salyards, I believe, was one, and I think Fred M. was one, and I don't remember the third, but one of them was using the original manuscript, and well, they chose 3 of the manuscripts to read through and compare in preparation for the 1908 edition. And so, effectively that 1874 process was replicated, but with additional examination by 2 additional editions in 1907.
Right. And then, as mentioned, the Whitmer family printed the Nephite records, which is a copy of the Book of Mormon. And then they were called the Church of Jesus Christ and were called the Whitmerites. And they started to peter out enough that in 1903, the printer's manuscript was sold to the RLDS Church. So once again, with the RLDS Church having the printer's manuscript, they were very excited to have this, and had a scripture committee work this for a couple of years, so that in 1908 they overhauled their format to create a new volume, because they had the printer's manuscript that they could then compare to other volumes and past historical volumes to be confident to publish their 1908 volume. So,
well, ladies and gentlemen, I don't see any other hands up, and we're past 10 o'clock my time. That means later for those of you on the East Coast. Oh, David Kaysen has another hand up.
I just have a real quick question. Is the printer's manuals or manuscript, is it still in existence?
the answer is yes. So actually what was interesting is in the 1970s and 80s, the RLDS Church and Salt Lake started playing nice together and coordinating preservation. And I know that Brigham Young or BYU or the church wasn't responsible to help preserve the printer's manuscript. And they did a good job supporting, or Salt Lake did a good job supporting the RLDS Church in preserving it. Locally and real recently, the church, the Community of Christ, offered the printer's manuscript to Salt Lake, and it changed hands in 2018. And if you look at 2018 printer's manuscript, you'll see a lot of news stories around the price, the details, and all of the foundation behind it. But right now it is owned by Salt Lake because it changed hands, and Salt Lake bought it from the Community of Christ in 2018. So what's also interesting is the original manuscript. Joseph Smith had the original manuscript, and he used it for the 1840 volume. And in 1842, 43, whatever, they did the Nauvoo house, and he put the original manuscript in a stone box in the Nauvoo house in a time capsule. And Joseph Smith passed away, and Emma Smith and Emma's second husband, Bideman, recovered it in like the 1860s, 70s. And it was
70s.
deteriorated a lot, that only about 25% of that is still around. So Salt Lake has both of them. So
The cornerstone in which it was buried cracked and the water seeped in and damaged the manuscript. And he then, Beidman parceled it out to friends, and it got dispersed rather widely. And the LDS Church has done a pretty good job to get 25% of it back together again.
So David as well, I'll give a shout out. Joseph Smith Papers did a really good job in archiving all of that. And so the printer's manuscript actually is archived digitally through the Joseph Smith Papers website that you can actually see. They've got an image of the printer's manuscript and then the text, simultaneously, that you can have some fun with that. So.
Well, thank you all for your comments, your kind attention. The Lord is blessing me right now, right now. I feel his presence here right now in my soul. I may not be able to see what the Lord has done for me, but I know he's blessing me right now, and may he bless you this week. Good night.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Brother Messick. Beautiful presentation. Delightful. What a repository of information. Wow.